All right, we are now streaming on YouTube. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the National Constitution Center. My name is Jenna. I'm the programs manager here at the Constitution Center. We're going to be here for all of your questions, your Constitution Day questions. And once we'll be broadcasting from Signers Hall in just a minute, but thank you for joining us. Tell me where you're from and happy Constitution Day. I'd like to see where all of our attendees are joining me from. We've got West Virginia, Lisa from West Virginia. Hi, Lisa. Charlottesville, Virginia. That's Deanne from Charlottesville. We've got, oh wow, now they're coming in fast. Lebanon, New Jersey. Danville Middle School in Arkansas. Windsor, Connecticut, I saw earlier. Vicky from Georgia, Akron, Ohio, Miss Allen's class from Lebanon, Indiana. Hello, hello. Happy Constitution Day, everyone. Carly from Atlanta. Okay. All right, well, as people are joining us, like I said, we have, we're going to be live from our main exhibit in just a moment, but please make sure to say hello in the chat box over here. That's how we're going to be taking questions too. So we're really excited. I'm going to, we are streaming live on YouTube, so I'm going to start the recording for this. So just so everyone knows, we are going to be recording this session. So as you're saying hello, make sure to send us all of your Constitution Day questions. I'm going to answer the ones that I can, and then when Madison joins us from Signers Hall, she'll show us some even more great stuff about the Constitutional Convention live from the National Constitution Center on Constitution Day. We're so happy. So give me 1 second and we'll start the recording. All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Constitution Day here at the National Constitution Center. My name is Jenna. I am here. I'm going to be your moderator for today. We did just do our live preamble reading on the front lawn, so we got to give staff a couple minutes to get back up to Signers Hall so they can, but they're going to be joining us live from our exhibits. It's going to be super special. Signers Hall is such a great room. It's my favorite place in the center. So once they get up there, they're going to be taking your questions from that part of the museum. But in the meantime, if you have any basic Constitution Day questions, send them my way because I'll be here to answer them. So in the meantime, we have lots of people joining us. We've got, people from Georgia. We've got people from Texas. So say hello, say happy Constitution Day, and send me your questions. Use the chat box. I know that there's a Q&A feature as well, but it's probably best if you use the chat box so we can see your questions coming in. All right, if you don't ask me questions, I'm going to start asking you questions. Like, what year was the Constitution signed? Can anybody tell me what year? We know that today is Constitution Day, so September 17th, but what year was that signed? How old is the Constitution turning this year? Can anybody tell me that? 1787, very good, Lindsay. That would make it very good, 233 years old. Thank you, Chad. All right, we got a question from Heidi. How many times was the Constitution edited before the final product? I don't even know if I have a final number on that. There was a long, hot summer in 1787 from Independence Hall. They closed all the doors, they closed all the windows. It was held in secret. So they went back and forth a lot. They had lots of drafts. We actually have some early drafts of the Constitution that they used to edit and mark up. We have some of those on display here at the center. So exactly how many times it was edited before the final product, I can't say for certain, but we do have the final product did get signed on September 17th, 1787, ratified a couple years later, and then it's been amended 27 times since then. So an amendment is a change to the Constitution. So that's so after the final product, it was changed 27 more times. You're welcome, Heidi. Anybody else have any questions? Who physically wrote the Constitution? You mean who put pen to paper and scribbled it? That is a man named Jacob Chalice. He was the scribe of the Constitution. So it's his handwriting that we say that see that we the people. So Jacob Chalice, the scribe of the Constitution. Of course, it was written by the men who attended the Constitutional Convention. The ideas were theirs. Mainly, James Madison is known as the father of the Constitution. He was really the driving force, but it was a collective effort from the delegates in 1787. But that's a great question. A lot of people know that Jacob Chalice is the scribe of the Constitution. Okay. How long did it take to write it? Well, the physical writing, I don't know, but it was from May to September. So May 25th, 525, that's actually our address in Philadelphia, 525 Arch Street, was the beginning of the Constitutional Convention. And then September 17th, 1787 was the final day that they signed. So pretty much the whole summer of 1787, the end of May to mid-September. All right, we've got a question about the 4th Amendment and 14th Amendment and mask mandates. Now that's a constitutional question that I don't feel I can get into. I'm certainly not a constitutional lawyer. So I'm actually, Chad, thank you so much for your question. It's a great question. It's a really interesting question, but I'm going to defer that question to a lot more constitutional experts. What we would love to talk about today once we join from Signers Hall is the convention, the writing. Certainly ask me any questions, but I think it's okay to say, I don't know. And that's a question where I think that I'm going to say, I don't know, and not weigh in on the constitutionality of the mask mandates. But that's a great question, and certainly for constitutional lawyers to answer for you. No worries. Thanks, Chad. All right. All right, so we have people logged in from Zoom. Oh, let me see if I can share their video. I think we have our people in Signers Hall. So stand by. Let's take a look. Allow panelists to start video. All right, do we have our? Are we going live from Signers Hall? All right. Hi, Madison. Can you hear me?
Right again.
You guys hear me? Hi. So you guys are in Signers Hall. Happy Constitution Day. I think we're going to get a better angle on that. All right, so in the meantime, we have a question from Mike. What was the most recent amendment to the Constitution? That's actually a really interesting constitutional story, Mike. The most recent amendment is the 27th Amendment, which basically says that Congress can't vote themselves a pay raise until they're reelected. So if Congress says that Congress people should be getting paid more money. That's great, but they don't get that pay raise until they're reelected to Congress, for a next term. The funny thing about that 27th Amendment, it was actually proposed along with the Bill of Rights. So those first 10 amendments, there was actually 12 proposed amendments, but only 10 of them were originally ratified. And that last 27th Amendment was, kind of stuck around for 200 years until it was finally ratified in the 1990s. So the 27th Amendment says Congress can't vote themselves a pay raise without being reelected. Why was the Constitution written? We have a question. So that was because under our current government, the Articles of Confederation, which was the government that was set up right after the Revolutionary War, it was a little hard to get things done. So they had a convention in Philadelphia to say, well, like, maybe we need to reassess the government, and they ended up completely rewriting it and throwing away the Articles of Confederation and giving us a constitution. So that's why the Articles of Confederation were thrown out and the Constitution was written. All right, here's a great question. Madison, I think you can take this one from Signers Hall. So did anyone who signed the Declaration of Independence also sign the Constitution?
We do have a few people in here who signed both documents. So we do have here, you might remember, the Declaration of Independence was 1776. We have 11 years before 1776 and 1787 with the signing of the Constitution. So we do have 6 delegates here that did sign both documents. Roger Sherman is one. We have a couple of gentlemen from other states here that signed all documents.
Yeah, so 6 delegates signed both the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Not as much overlap as you would think, right? Who's missing from Signers Hall?
Okay, so that's a great question. That's probably the #1 question we get in here. People will walk into this room and say, hey, where's Thomas Jefferson? Or where's John Adams or John Hancock? Well, Thomas Jefferson is actually over in France at this time, so he's not here for the convention. And John Adams is serving over in England and the Netherlands. They're doing work abroad for us. And then John Hancock, he's the governor of Massachusetts at this time, so not at the convention, but that's a fantastic question.
Yeah, so since you just joined us from that really cool room, it's my favorite exhibit. Why don't you tell everyone a little bit about the room that you're standing in right now?
Okay, this is my favorite exhibit in the entire National Constitution Center. This is Signers Hall. As you can see, I'm surrounded by 42 life-sized bronze statues of the men who on September 17th, 1787, had to decide if they would sign the new Constitution. Of the men in this room, 39 did put pen to parchment and sign the document on the final day. But we do have 3 gentlemen who are about to pan to over in the corner, those dissenters, those 3 gentlemen over there. They did not sign that day, but everybody else in this room did. But those 3 gentlemen, George Mason, Elbridge Gerry, Edmund Randolph, they are the 3 who chose not to sign that day. Those are our dissenters.
Who else do we have? It looks like that's Ben Franklin there.
Yes, we have here, this is Dr. Benjamin Franklin. He is 81 years old at the time of the signing of the Constitution, the oldest delegate in attendance. There were times throughout the convention that he would actually hand his speeches and his papers over to this man, James Wilson, so he could read for him. Dr. Franklin is 81 years old at the time, and that is a really long time to live. Back then, that's super long. A little bit of contrast, the youngest delegate that we have in attendance is Jonathan Dayton at 26 years old. Jonathan Dayton of New Jersey, 26 years old and 81 years old. Dr. Franklin, those are our 2 extremes, if you will. But we do have the median age for the rest of the signers is about 42 years old. So that's about the average age of the signers. Great question.
All of our signers are as true to life as possible, right? They're all accurate in terms of height, facial features.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We had a dedicated team of historians that worked on this project. All of these statues were made specifically for us here at the National Constitution Center. So the historians took tailor's notes and physician's notes to figure out just how life-size these gentlemen were. So what you see in this room here is pretty accurate. For reference, I'm about 5'9", and you can see I'm almost as tall as my friend here, Abraham Baldwin. But stark contrast, we have James Madison, who's 5'4". the shortest delegate in attendance at the convention. You can see him right behind Baldwin here. He's on this corner here. And then if you zoom over here to George Washington, he's one of the tallest delegates in attendance. He's almost 6'4". People estimate between 6'2" and 6'4". So we have a lot of different sizes in this room. I got to point out my personal favorite, Alexander Hamilton. He is the average height for a man
Broadway
at this time.
star.
Oh yeah, he's our Broadway star. Everybody comes in here and sings the musical, songs from the musical. He is the average height for a man at this time. Just for reference, I'm almost 5'9". Hamilton here is about 5'8", 5'7", 5'8", which is pretty interesting. So I love this room so much because if you look at all of their faces, if you look at all of their features, the artists and the historians that worked on this project took portraits to get as great of detail as they could into these statues. So you'll notice these faces are incredibly lifelike. And even the clothes, if you look at the cues or the bows on the back of their hair, their buttons, everything is so intricate and elaborate. It was beautifully done. Any other questions?
Here's a good question we get a lot. Who has the quill pen? That's like, people love that we used to write with the feathers.
I know, it's hard to believe, right? I'm so used to using my ballpoint pen, but here we have Abraham Baldwin. He is inviting you to sign the Constitution. So George Washington, on September 17th, 1787, he was the first one to sign, the president of the convention. The last one to sign is Abraham Baldwin of Georgia. He's here to invite you to sign the Constitution. So he's holding the quill pen, if you will, dip it in ink and sign away. It's a great question.
Yeah. From Georgia, anybody from Georgia here? Tell us in the chat, tell us where you're joining us from. Tell us if you have any questions. It doesn't look like we're getting any questions. Hopefully they'll start coming in, but it's okay because we have plenty to talk about in Signers Hall. Can you show us the dissenters and talk about them? Because they're a great story.
We can move our way over to the dissenters here. These three gentlemen, we have Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts, we have Edmund Randolph of Virginia, and George Mason, also of Virginia. Really important. Look at their body language. Look at their pose. You know, they look kind of upset or almost aggravated, if you will, and they're kind of sequestered here in the corner of Signers Hall because they didn't sign the Constitution. They chose not to sign that day. So they're relatively removed from the rest of the proceedings on the day of the signing. What they really wanted, you know, and they later got was a Bill of Rights. They didn't feel that the Constitution was finished, as it were, that day. It didn't fulfill their requests and their kind of requirements for a new government. So they hold out and they don't sign the Constitution. But George Mason here is nicknamed the father of the Bill of Rights, because although James Madison was instrumental in drafting it, a lot of the Bill of Rights were really modeled after George Mason's Virginia's Bill of Rights. So while they dissented, while they didn't sign the Constitution, it's still hugely important in our nation's founding and especially in our constitutional history. So these are our dissenters.
All right, we have a question from Jillian. In what state was the Constitution signed? And you're near those delegates right now, aren't you?
Oh yes, we signed the Constitution in Pennsylvania. Actually, just a few hundred yards from where we are right now is Independence Hall. It was then called the Pennsylvania State House, but it is the site of the signing of two incredibly important documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. So the delegates gathered in Independence Hall for a long, hot summer of debate and discourse over how our new government would look. So it really is just a few hundred feet, a few hundred paces from where we are right now in the museum. Right here in Philadelphia, this is where constitutional history was made. Great question.
All right, and so we've got a question from Mike. What was the First Amendment written for? So that's really interesting. The amendments were missing from the original draft of the Constitution. Like we said, that's part of the reason why the dissenters didn't. So what does the First Amendment grant us?
First Amendment is one of my favorite amendments to cover. Those are our freedoms, freedom of expression. So we have, right to free speech, religion, assembly, petition, all of that kind of in action. We like to think about why that might be important. Why would these founders, want to put that in the Constitution? The freedom to assemble and free press, to criticize the government. I mean, think about it. We just fought a revolution against a very tyrannical government, and we wanted to ensure that our new government wouldn't be like that we wouldn't have a monarchy or absolute rule. So we wanted to ensure that all of us citizens, we the people, would have these personal freedoms protected under the new Constitution? Great question. Love the amendment. First Amendment is awesome.
Yeah. I'm also a big fan of the 19th Amendment, which was pretty important. And we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of that amendment this year.
Absolutely. I also love the 19th Amendment. And I do want to point that out. When you were looking around this room, you'll notice there's 42 life-size bronze statues. Notice how I say men. They're all men. And while yes, they are all, brilliant thinkers, and, we have some of the best constitutional minds in the country, really in our nation's history in this room, you'll look around, there's no women. Back when the Constitution was written in 1787, the people who gathered in Independence Hall for that summer of debate and discourse, it was no women were included. We didn't have, any other, free African Americans. We had no one except for these white men who were kind of in charge of this creation of our new government. And while the plans that they created, some of them brilliant, some of them were also imperfect in that we didn't really secure voting rights or enfranchisement for a lot of people. So while I do appreciate these men and all that they've done for our constitutional history, I do think it's important that the Constitution, what they laid out on that day, they made it possible for we the people to change it. So in the amendment articles, we have the ability to change something if we don't like it. And that's hugely important because this year we're celebrating 150 years of African American men getting the right to vote and 100 years of women getting the right to vote. So 233 years of constitutional history is started right here in this room, and we the people have made it more inclusive as the decades and years and decades have gone on.
So we have a question from Carl, and this is a great question because we celebrate Constitution Day on September 17th, but that wasn't the end of the story. So what year did the Constitution get ratified?
So the Constitution is given back to the people. This delegation, they returned to their respective states, and they kind of had to plead with the people. Do we like this document that we created? Will everyone agree to kind of operate underneath it? That was the big question, and a lot of these people, Alexander Hamilton, he played a huge role in making sure that all of the work that went on this summer, that it would come to fruition, that it would actually happen, that the Constitution would become our supreme law of the land. So after the Constitution, the Constitutional Convention, this document goes out to the people and it goes out to the states. And the magic number was 9. We needed 9 of the 13 states to say, yes, you know what? We're going to operate under this new Constitution. Does anybody know which state became the last state necessary to ratify the Constitution before it became law? Anyone? It was June of 1788, I believe.
Anyone know the last state that pushed us over the finish line? Or here's
If
another. Here's
oh
one
yeah,
that
if
might
we have anyone from New Hampshire, good for you. You are the last state to ratify. New Hampshire is number 9, and that is the last state that we needed to officially begin to operate under this new Constitution, which was a huge victory.
Yeah, and the first, of course, being in the Philadelphia area, we see it on the license plates all the time. Delaware, the first state, was the first one to ratify. Pennsylvania came in at number 2. So at the Constitution Center, I don't think you can quite get a shot of it from where you are, but we have all those flags of the states in the right order. And so Pennsylvania is the second flag up there.
Oh yeah, you'll have to come and visit the Constitution Center. We have all of those flags and the date that they ratified the Constitution. I saw recently somebody from Delaware pointed out, oh, that's why it says the first state on our license plate. So Delaware has bragging rights for being the first state to operate under the new Constitution, right. The first one to ratify.
That's another common question I get in Signers Hall, or maybe more of a misunderstanding. They think it was they were the first to sign the Constitution, but they weren't. They were the first to ratify it, because when they signed the Constitution, they went in geographic order, right?
Yes, exactly. That is exactly what happened.
They started in the north, and that's why Abraham Baldwin of Georgia was the last person to sign, because Georgia was the southernmost state at that point.
Exactly. And you may have covered this already, Jenna, but do we have any viewers from Rhode Island who are tuning in for our Signers Hall Q&A?
I don't know if there's anybody from Rhode Island, let us know, but I didn't say this yet, so go ahead.
Okay, well, if you look around the room, we have 12 of the 13 states represented in Signers Hall, but you won't find Rhode Island. They didn't send anybody to the convention. Of the 55 delegates, all of the states were represented except for Rhode Island. And why? Well, they really feared that a new government, that the new national government was going to give less power to Rhode Island. And when we think about it, I can kind of understand why, Rhode Island is such a small state. They're really worried that a new government would take away what power that they had under the Articles of Confederation. So Rhode Island didn't show up, but they did eventually sign the Constitution, or they eventually ratified the Constitution and of course joined the Union. So Rhode Island, while we didn't welcome you to the convention, while you didn't join us, we're still obviously so happy to have you in the Union.
Now, here's a really great question that kind of pertains to us more as museum professionals than historians, and that's how do they preserve documents like the Constitution? Now, we don't have that in our care. The Constitution is actually held in the National Archives, but we do have a lot of great documents, and I'm sorry that our registrar isn't on with us because she would probably be the best person to answer all of those questions. But Madison, why don't you tell them a little bit about how we in the museum industry preserve these important items of history? And that came from a 10th grade class in West Virginia.
Oh, perfect. I will absolutely do that. Great question. I'll do it to the best of my ability. I'm not the registrar, but I have talked with our fantastic registrar about some of her kind of daily duties to make sure that all of these documents, all of these artifacts stay in tip-top condition, that they stay preserved. So one of the things that we do is you walk into one of our exhibits, it's a little bit colder. You might need to bring a sweater with you. And we do this to make sure that the documents are maintained at a suitable temperature, because too hot or too cold, and it can really like erode the material and the paper and the artifact in general. Something else that we do is that we limit the amount of light, direct light, that can be on these artifacts. And also they do use special light bulbs. I'm not exactly sure what, but they do have special kind of lights that preserve the document so it's not so damaging, direct sunlight beating down on it. We think about this because, we know so much more about artifact preservation now, but we really didn't know that much earlier in our history. In our Constituting Liberty Gallery, we have an 1826 engraving of the Declaration of Independence. And just a few years earlier, John Quincy Adams is our Secretary of State, and he kind of is looking at the Declaration of Independence, the original, and he's looking at it's faded, the ink is coming off, the paper is not in great shape. It had been hung in a law office window, it just had direct sunlight beating down on it. Not great for posterity, right? For us to be able to see these amazing documents. So he commissions a man named William J. Stone to create 200 copies of the Declaration of Independence so that you and me, we could see what it would have looked like, however many years later. And that process was a little bit, it could have potentially damaged the original document, but this is the best way he knew how. He laid down a cloth soaked in acid on top of the original Declaration, lifted it up along with half of the ink, placed that on a thin copper slab, and etched that out as his template to create 200 copies. So we do have one of those here at the National Constitution Center. But if you think about that, we've come a long way from artifact preservation. So that's a fantastic question. And I definitely encourage you to come check us out. And you can also view our registrar, Teresa. She has on our Facebook page and YouTube page a link where you can see how she preserves these documents and how she takes care of these priceless artifacts. Great question. Yeah,
so interesting working in a museum, seeing stuff like that. When they, when I was getting a sneak peek of the new 19th Amendment exhibit, which is now open, I commented on this great old photograph that they had blown up, and they said, we found this photograph. It was really great. It's a little girl standing next to the Justice Bell, which is a replica of the Liberty Bell with a Votes for Women sash. They said, do you see anything? And I noticed that there was a fingerprint on the print, and it was on the actual photograph. Someone had actually just touched it, and then when they blew it up, it was, and of course we would never touch photographs today, but they didn't know that back then.
Oh yeah, our registrar, she's always using gloves. They handle the artifacts so carefully, and make sure if it's a book or if it's a picture that gloves are being worn and that we're being very gentle when we're opening pages or anything like that, just so we can preserve these artifacts so that for generations, you and me and all of our posterity can see them and appreciate them in the future, which is great.
All right, here's a question that we get a lot too. Are there any mistakes in the Constitution, spelling, grammar, things like that? I know that there's some differences in how they used to spell things back then that might lead to that impression, right?
Yes, you know, we do have a lot of people that come in. When you read the Constitution, the original document that they signed that day on September 17th, the one that's located in the archives, people look at it and it's a little weird. All of the F's look like S's. So we have they used to have this type print called a long S, and it made the letter look a lot longer and very difficult to read at times. You know, we have when you would have an S, it would look like a kind of a long cursive F, if you will. So when it says, you know, people who signed it, like George Washington, it reads like George Woffington. It's a little odd, and that's in the Constitution and several other founding documents a number of times. But the long S, as it was called, was eventually taken out of, you know, the language and the encyclopedia, I think, even in 1817. So that is gone now. But it makes it a little difficult to read when you're looking at the original documents, these long F's or long S's as they're called.
Yeah. Okay, here's a great one, and certainly an appropriate one for today. Why did they use the term "we the people"? Why is that, you know, the beginning phrase of the Constitution?
I have to tell you, the preamble of the Constitution is my favorite part of the whole document. It is kind of the blueprint. You know, it tells us how we're going to lay out the new government. But I think it's really important because when you look around this room and all of these men who on that day, they signed this Constitution, this didn't just become law. It wasn't just immediate and this is how we're going to go and this is how we're going to govern ourselves. They had to give the document back to the people, to us, to make sure that we were on board with it, that we were okay with being governed this way. It was essentially a gift back to the people. So when we talk about we the people of the United States, that doesn't just mean, you know, Gouverneur Morris or Benjamin Franklin or our dissenters here. That's you. That's me, that's Jenna, that's all of us together. We the people encompasses every single person who's living under the Constitution, and I think that is amazing. Great question.
Yeah, thanks, Madison. And you mentioned Gouverneur Morris, so we have to talk about him now. Tell us about maybe a lesser known, but should be more known signer that we have in Signers Hall.
Yes, this is Gouverneur Morris right here. He is with our Pennsylvania delegation. He is seated here. He's right over Dr. Franklin's shoulder. He is 35 at the time of the signing of the Constitution. And he's here. He's actually originally a New Yorker, but he kind of comes down to Pennsylvania. And he is serving on this kind of like committee of sorts within the convention to really stylize it all. And he here, I do like to point out, he's leaning over Dr. Franklin here. But so he was actually quite tall. He's about 6'4". But if you'll notice, I'm not sure if we can get the camera down here, you'll notice he's hunched over. He does have a peg leg here. A lot of people come in and ask, oh, well, did he, you know, wounded in the Revolution? Not quite. That's not what happened. I have heard some stories that he was actually in a carriage accident, and this is the result from the carriage accident. But a hugely important person during the convention who's kind of largely forgotten or kind of left by the wayside out of history, that he was, you know, a lawyer and a politician and really just an incredibly important man. You know, he, along with James Wilson, they figure out to include, you know, we the people of the United States versus we the people of Connecticut, Georgia, Virginia, kind of a, you know, a mouthful of all of the states, which was really fantastic foresight because, you know, the country was going to expand. You know, we had 13 states then, but now we have 50. So it was great that we included we the people of the United States rather than just we the people of those 13.
So I have a question from Lindsay. What were some of the major debates at the Constitutional Convention? That's a really great one because there were a lot of them. Those guys didn't agree on much.
Lindsay, fantastic question. The debates that are happening at the Constitution are over at the Constitutional Convention. It's a number of things, really. But one of the big ones that I love to talk about is the debate over representation. So Article 1 of the Constitution lays out Congress and the legislative body. And these gentlemen in here had a lot of different visions for how we should be represented, how the people should be represented in the national government, in their respective states. And we had people like James Madison and James Wilson over here who really supported this idea of the Virginia plan. And the idea of the plan is that representation should be based on the population, the apportionment of population in each state, which makes sense for states like Pennsylvania and Virginia, which is like the powerhouse, that's a huge state back then. It's enormous. And they really wanted the representation in the two houses of the Senate and the Congress to be based on population, how many people are in each state, that kind of thing, which understandably, delegates from smaller states were not on board with that. New Jersey, William Patterson, comes up with a New Jersey plan that says, whoa, hold on. I think all states should have equal representation in the Senate and in the House. Well, the larger states, Virginia, they weren't really on board with that because they knew that they wouldn't have as much, pull or say in representation and matters of the national government. So we have our gentleman, Roger Sherman, who comes up with this great compromise, the Connecticut Compromise. And he essentially lets them both have everybody gets a little bit of what they want. So in the way that our Congress was set up, he said, all right, the Senate will have the same number of representatives for each state, no matter what, which is why today we have 2 senators for every state. It doesn't matter if you're in Wyoming and have a really small population, or if you're in California and have a huge population, you only get 2 senators. However, the House of Representatives, the second part of Congress, they are allowed representation based on population, which is why you have California and other larger states. They do have more people in the House of Representatives to represent the needs of that larger body of people. So that is one of the compromises that has reached this great debate over representation. And we can thank Roger Sherman for that. So he is our great compromiser, if you will. But that's a fantastic question.
Yeah. And I just want to take a moment to say that we have a lot of really great questions coming in. Some of them are more, constitutional law questions. And so I'm not going to take them. We had one a little earlier from Chad about mass policy. We're not going to take them right now. Like I said, this is more of a signer's hall. Let's talk about the Constitutional Convention. But I will say that we are addressing a lot of constitutional issues, and there's a difference between political questions, constitutional questions every week with those classes with Curry and Jeff. So our constitutional exchanges, check them out on our website, constitutioncenter.org. There's lots of, every week there's a new topic where we're really diving into those questions, and Jeff is the best person to answer those questions. And so he will take those questions for you. And Madison, another big debate the way they had at the convention that I think we need to talk about if we're talking about debates and compromises is the slavery issue, and the fact that they couldn't really solve that issue of slavery at the Constitutional Convention. And Curry calls it rightly, a lot of people say it's the original sin of the United States.
Absolutely. I think we definitely need to talk about that. We look around this room and we have so many talented, brilliant minds in this room, but for all of their efforts that summer, these delegates could not resolve this issue of slavery. As our chief learning officer calls it, and some historians as well, America's original sin. And slavery makes its way into the debates at the Constitutional Convention. And what we end up with actually affects representation in the first article of the Constitution. So essentially, we have delegates from states that have very concentrated enslaved populations. So, essentially a lot of the delegates in the South, over 20 of these delegates own slaves themselves. So they would like to protect their interests. And essentially, when it came to the question of representation, while there may not necessarily be a lot of, free white men in those states, not as many as, enslaved individuals, they wanted to make sure that the total population would be reflected in their representation in Congress. So you have a lot of these delegates from the southern states, pushing for, enslaved people to be counted, in representation, because they would like more say in Congress and more say in kind of the rules of, representation. But then you have people in the northern states who don't think that enslaved individuals should count toward representation. We have Gouverneur Morris, who we talked about earlier. He was an ardent opposer of, including this in the Constitution, because we mentioned, not having the right of property in man. And while there was no official mention of slavery in the Constitution, these gentlemen debated it a lot that summer. And what they ultimately come up with to appease both the North and the South is that they decide to count enslaved individuals as 3 3/5 of a person, which is what we call the 3/5 clause, which counted enslaved people as just 3/5 of an individual for purposes of representation in Congress. So again, I like to mention that the Constitution, this convention was an incredible radical brainstorming of some incredible constitutional ideals, but a lot of it and some of it is imperfect. And this is one of those examples, that they let this continue. And while slavery wasn't initially mentioned in the Constitution, it does kind of set the groundwork for allowing it to persist until 1808, when we halt the international, importation of enslaved individuals into the United States. But thank you, Jenna. That's a really important question, and I just think it's a really important topic to discuss.
And thank you, Madison. Thank you for showing us around Signers Hall. We are out of time. We do have to open the museum. We are free admission today, thanks to Citizens. So if you are in the area, come on down. If not, if you're anywhere, please join us at noon for our town hall with Justice Gorsuch. And we also have our Liberty Medal this evening, and we're going to do another Q&A session at 3 p.m. Eastern time. So if you would like to come back, or for those of you who are watching this on a recording and would want to watch us live, 3 p.m. September 17th, we'll do another live Q&A. Again, noon Eastern time with Justice Gorsuch, and Liberty Medal tonight honoring Justice Ginsburg. Thank you guys so much. Enjoy the rest of your Constitution Day.
Bye, everyone.
So who's our recording?
Hmm?
So